Hello and welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, your daily guide to decoding current affairs the smart way for UPSC examination. It's September 4th, 2025 and today's edition features two thought-provoking articles for Mains 2026. Firstly, we'll be looking at the main debate, should reservations exceed the 50% cap in the country? Second, we'll be looking into the recent proposals for a legislative act in the country for enacting the High Seas Treaty. In our Prelims 2026 simplified section, we cover various essential articles which are extremely crucial for the upcoming Prelims examination. So let's begin. Hi guys, welcome back again to another session of the Analyst where we will be touching upon the most important articles of the day as usual. Now firstly, we'll be starting with the reservation topic which is there in the Hindu today, and as usual, Mr. Rangarajan is an excellent author of this article and also various other articles related to Indian polity, where he talks upon elections, about fundamental rights, about our parliament and various other topics. So today he is talking upon a very important question in the Indian polity circles, which is regarding that should reservations cross the 50% cap which is currently there in the country. This is the main context here. Why? Because there are so many debates all around the country, all around the states, whether we should be increasing this or not, and there have been so many debates, so many demands from various dominant communities within the OBCs, within the SC and the ST communities to increase the reservation cap beyond 50%. Now, this is an extremely important article for your Indian polity when it comes to Indian constitution and the features, because the topic of reservation touches upon the main essential feature, which is actually the fundamental rights of the country. Now, when we talk about this, when I try to introduce this, the author here has beautifully articulated this via the debates on equality, the term equality. So, before understanding debate, we have to firstly focus on what do you mean by equality in the very first place, right? Now, imagine that there are two people who want to see a cricket match, for example, across just the wall or the fence here. Now, if you see, equality means that if I go by the dictionary definition of equality, it means that everyone is having a pedestal on which they are standing upon them and they are actually looking at the match. But here, if you can see, the tall guy is clearly having the perfect view of the cricket match, followed by the less taller guy, and this guy here is not able to look at the match at all. So this means that there are some sections of the population, despite you are giving them provisions, government schemes and so on, despite that they're not able to enjoy their livelihood, their lives fully. And that is why we have to actually understand that when we talk about equality, it means that each individual or group of people is given the same resources or opportunities. But here we are ignoring the privileges that some sections of the population already have from before. That is, for example, in this case, he is a tall guy, right? Now relate this example with a person who has huge land resources, which is a very wealthy individual, right? And that person has access to each and everything in the Indian society and even, economy and every other sphere. So that is why, equality, if we try to give everyone equal opportunities, right, or resources, it is sometimes not enough, which we actually know as a formal equality. That means we are talking about that particular perspective without considering their starting point or historical context, which is taken in the concept of substantiative equality. This means that we have to give differential treatment to people like them. Maybe we have to stack up two more cardboard so they can actually view the match properly. So that is where we need to account for the various historical injustices and various other structural issues in the country. For example, when we consider the cases of OBCs, the SCs, the STs, these were the groups of the population in the country who have faced this discrimination over a period of time. And that is why, we have the concept of reservation for them. I need not elaborate on the concept of reservation because every one of you are actually aware of the basics of the same. Now, reservation in the country is actually helping those people to actually climb up the ladders of the society via reservation in jobs, reservation in education institutions, and so many other spheres. So that is why we have to understand that we have to move beyond the formal equality ladder. So that is why there is a question in 2017 prelims examination. I want you to listen to this discussion right now and then answer this question: what do you actually mean that equality in the society is actually implying the absence of which of the following? Now, moving on, we have so many other questions in prelims examination which I wanted to highlight from 18, from 19, in the recent times from 23 also, which is touching upon the basics of polity. I mean the basics of constitution or basics of the various political theories. For example, say they are asking about what is the appropriate relationship between law and liberty. Then they are also asking about a close definition of liberty here. Then they are asking about the very basics of what do you mean by due process of law or a constitutional government. So if you know the answers of them, please do let me know. But this say that you have to be very, clear with the basics from your NCERT class 11 political theory, where you have the definitions of liberty, opportunity, equality, justice, peace, and all those terms. You have to be very well aware of, because they are actually asking these very basic things. Sometimes these basic questions can be very difficult. If you want to know how difficult it is, you try to attempt those questions and answer in the comments. Now, when we talk about the topic, when we are coming back to the reservation debate here, we have to firstly understand the constitutional backgrounds or the constitutional articles, and about the various associated articles also. Now, when we are talking about equality, we know that equality have some negative and positive connotations in our constitution. The negative connotation is via the equality before law in Article 14, because this is, a kind of equality, which means that laws are same for all, right? But here, that is a good thing, but we have to understand we need equal protection of laws also. That laws must be actually be well tailored for those individuals who are disadvantaged. Also, when we talk about non-discrimination articles, we have Article 15 subclause 1, 2 subclause 2, which is prohibiting any kind of discrimination based on religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth. Also, when we look at the special provisions that we have in the Constitution with reference to the educational provisions for the disadvantaged communities, we have Article 15 subclause 4, which states that the country of India, the polity of India or the state of India can actually make provisions for various socially and educationally backward classes, SCs and STs, including their educational parameters. Also, via the 93rd Amendment, we also have that we have various quota in educational institutions, including private unaided institutions too, where we have the provisions for economically weaker sections, excluding the minority institutions. I actually covered this in my previous analyst also, why they are excluded. In the comment section, you should definitely let me know that why they are excluded, so that I can see that whether you are following the discussions closely or not. Okay. Also, via the 103rd Amendment in 2019, we had the provision of excess amount of 10% reservation from the general category for the economically weaker section. Now, this is actually pertaining to only general category. Okay. Now, when we look at the other provisions here, we have the provisions of public employment. When under Article 16 subclause 1, we have the equality of opportunity in public jobs. Article 16 subclause 4 is telling that we have the quota for backward classes for who are not adequately represented at the government level, at the state or the central government. Because that even after we are giving them reservation in jobs, sometimes they do not represent the overall demographic structure of the country. Also, a very, very important provision here is the promotion side. So here we also have the provision in our constitution for the reservation of promotion for SC and the STs subject to conditions, because according to various experts, they realized that even when we are giving them reservation in jobs, it does not mean that after they are getting the job, they will be equally again, right? Substantive equality you have to keep in mind. They sometimes do not progress up the career ladder, because even within the government circles, there are allegations of Brahmanical dominance or upper caste dominance, right? So sometimes the higher officials, according to various allegations, right, they do not allow the people from the lower sections of the population to rise up to their level of authority. So that is why we also have the reservation in promotions, which is a very, very important one. And at the end of the day, we also have the same with reference to the EWS category, where they also have the reservation in jobs apart from the reservation in the educational institutions, right? So this is what you have here at one place, all of the things that you need to know and revise also via your handout that you need to know for your reservation. But now, when we are talking about that 50% limit, we have to understand that reservation means that we are giving an equal platform. We are trying to make the field level playing for everyone. So be it any person from the OBC community or from the general community, we have to ensure that each and everyone is not only following equality in dictionary terms, but equality in this kind of substantive terms also. So that is why for the very first time in the country, in the Balaji versus the state of Mysore 1962 case, the discussion on the 50% cap came up for the very first time, right? Where the Supreme Court noted that all of the fundamental rights in the country are actually subjected to various kinds of restrictions. It means that if you have some right as an individual citizen of the country, or say even a foreigner in the country, you are actually subjected to reasonable restrictions in the public interest, for national interest, for security purposes, and so on. And that is why when we are talking about reservations, we have to understand this is actually reasonable restriction on the other, say, the general class of the population. But here, this reasonable restriction, we have to understand this was extended that, okay, we have to have a limit on the aspect of reservation, that is around at 50%, which was later established in the Indira Sawhney case. But in the Balaji case of 1962 in the Supreme Court, it told that reservations should be within reasonable limits. And earlier, there was some aspect of 68% reservation, which the Supreme Court straight away struck down. They told that 68% is too high, it must be brought down. So for the first time it was established there must be some reasonable limit. Okay, so a quantitative limit was for the first time emerged in the country, and here this was followed on by the state of Kerala in 1975 case of the Supreme Court again. So here the Supreme Court told that reservation is not an exception but is a necessary outcome of the need for equality. Okay, so here it's championed the substantive equality here and shared away the formal equality definition. Okay, but it did not yet rule upon the 50% cap, which was actually done in the Indira Sawhney case of 1992, a very, very landmark case. So all of these cases are important, but among them the most important is this one. So when we talk about this case, is firstly upheld the 27% reservation which was recommended earlier by the Mandal Commission. Okay, then it reaffirmed that in India we cannot breach the 50% cap. Okay, when we talk about the general category, and the rest 50% should be divided between the OBCs, SCs and the ST communities. So here this judgment also told that in extraordinary situation, for example in a state, there are some regions which are extremely backward and they do not have representation at the education institutions, at the government jobs, they do not have any representatives, and in those cases, in those extreme situations, 50% cap can be breached. Okay, so also to identify the actual benefactors of reservation, actually the people who need reservation in the country, it also introduced the concept of creamy layer, right? That means up to a certain limit, if you're below that limit, you are eligible for reservation for the OBCs only. Above that, you are not eligible for reservation in OBC. But this was also extended in 2024 to the SCs, the scheduled caste also. We'll be looking at the next one. Now, we have another case here, Janhit Abhiyan 2022 case at the Supreme Court. It also was looking at the challenge from 2019 when the government introduced a 10% reservation from the EWS section. So it also upheld that. Now, the main question in this case was whether you can actually breach the 50% ceiling or not. Now, earlier you have seen that the other 50% is divided between the OBCs, the SCs, the STs, right? Now, the government bought a 10% EWS reservation for the general category. Okay. Now, there were various petitioners who argued that we are giving reservations of EWS from the general quota, right? We have the other 50% quota separately. Now they are telling that the Indira Shoni case told that 50% reservation cap should not be extended. Government of India told that we are not breaching that 50% cap. We are actually taking the quota out of the general quota here. So this was deliberated upon, as the Supreme Court thought that okay, this is fine because we are not touching upon the rest of the 50%, and the rest of the 50% category here is not being increased. What is being increased or decreased is between the general category only, right? So it held that the 50% cap is applicable to only the backward classes, which are including the SCs, STs and the OBCs, and not to the EWS quota, correct? But this judgment for the very first time is opening the doors for further new arguments. It is setting a precedent that once the Supreme Court has allowed, the breach of, 50% reservation, nevertheless it is within the general category. But if you take the total reservation as a whole, it is 10% plus 60%, 50% here, right? That means that indirectly it is kind of breaching the 50% cap. That means here, technically, as of now in the country, we are having 59.5% reservation, and the rest are totally outside the reservation category. It doesn't matter whether this 10% is from the general or not. So this means that we have opened a Pandora box, right, which is a box full of surprises, full of amusements, right? You do not know what is coming out of that, because the social groups in the country, right, will be demanding the other side also. Now the other sections of the population, whether be it is a general category or the reserved category, they will be demanding their own demands right now. Right? Now, when we talk about reservations, but when we talk about the ground reality, we have to acknowledge some issues. Firstly, after this OBC reservation was implemented, it was going on in the country, the government of India appointed the Justice Rohini Commission to look into whether we are implementing the OBC reservation in a proper way or not. It found out that only 25% of the OBC castes, that means around 150 out of the 600 castes, only have captured 97% of the jobs plus educational reservation. This means that we have the rise of some dominant castes, right? And they are actually taking all the benefits out of them. Okay, and also nearly 1000 OBCs communities have around zero representation. This implication is that only the elite within the OBCs are getting all the reservation. On the other hand, when you look at the SC and the STs, right? Now, the Punjab versus Devendra Singh 2024 case told that there also should be a creamy layer between the scheduled caste of the population, because, the judgment was given in a majority judgment, right? Where only one judge dissented, because this judgment told that creamy layer can be actually decided by the state government. So one dissenting judge told that, okay, the state governments should not have the power to designate the SCs between the creamy layer, because only the parliament has that power. But when we talk about the logic of this judgment, we can actually understand, because even, Justice Gavai, right, who actually is coming from a Dalit community, he is telling that, the child of a scheduled caste IAS or IPS civil service officer cannot be equated to the child of a poor SC person studying in a Gram Panchayat or Zilla Parishad school. It makes sense, right? That is why the Supreme Court told that, okay, there also should be creamy layer, just the, the same thing that we have within the OBCs in the SCs also. Now the big question here is that, should this 50% cap be breached or not? Firstly, let us look at some arguments in favor of exceeding this cap. That we know there are some communities which are still not representative, right? We have so many people who are out of the reservation, ladder, because they sometimes do not have proper documents and all those things. So implementation is not proper. So, and also we do not know the exact number, right? So the exact number, it is generally via the caste census that will be taking place soon. Then only will be getting to know what is the actual number of people that should be getting the benefits. Also, the substantive equality logic, according to N.M. Thomas, a very well-known eminent political commentator, is telling that we can actually extend this 50% cap, but only via temporary provision. We should not be trying to extend it for a n number of years, right? We have to subject this to review also if there are deep barriers of those SC, ST or OBC communities in the society as of now, as of today. There are so many parts of the country, you can also let me know in the comments, right, which are still now facing the issues of untouchability, discrimination at the public places also. Also, when we understand that various state governments right now have also taken up various state specific solutions, so that is also working for their end. For example, Tamil Nadu is one case here. Also, when we talk about the exceptional circumstances in the Indira Shawnee case, right, this is also allowing the breach of 50%. So we have also one Supreme Court judgment which is supporting the same. Now, when we talk about the arguments to retain the 50% cap, now it means that we have to retain that 50% cap. We should not be trying to go beyond that, because we have to ensure that merit is also recognized when it comes to jobs and education, right? Also, when we talk about this increasing of the 50% cap, so we have the general category people also. They will also be protesting against them. So that is also can lead to more and more amount of social tensions against the vulnerable sections of the population. Also, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's vision, when we talked about reservation, his vision that there are a minority of people in the country who are not getting the equitable benefits of the country in their society. So that is where this was a minority measure. Reservation is a minority measure. Now, if I am telling that there should be 60% reservation, so are they in a minority now? Now, we need to help the people who are actually seeking and needing help. Right? If you are extending beyond the 50%, then they are no longer minority. They no longer need targeted intervention. Right? It will only become an election issue otherwise. Now, we also need to go and explore some various alternative solutions which we are going to discuss in this multi-dimensional approach. Firstly, let us conduct the caste census at the earliest, because any kind of policy in the country should be based on data and not guesses or estimates. Also, subcategorization is an excellent way to go forward. Just like the way we have subcategorized OBCs, now there is a need of the hour to also subcategorize the SCs and the STs also. So this is where we can actually identify some groups which have advanced and the other groups would be needing the reservation. Right? Accordingly, we also have to adopt the creamy layer model too in the other sections too. Also, this reservation debate is a very sensitive debate. When I am speaking right now, I'm also very careful about speaking some words, not hurting some other sentiments. That is why we have to understand that Indian society is extremely sensitive to this kind of discussions. So we need to have this kind of informed debate at the state legislature assemblies, at the parliament, where everyone should be cooperating in this debate. Everyone should be looking at the data and the need of the hour, not only at mere political vote banks and all those things, right? So this is where we need political will. And let me tell you guys, political will is the most extreme superpower when we talk about in any democracy. Look at the case of Singapore, where that has went just because the sheer will of political will. Next, we have to focus on capacity building. We have to look beyond reservation now. We have to look at various aspects of skill upgradation also. If you can look at the literacy rate and the various graduate percentages and also representation of the various classes of the population, right? We see that the SC and the OBCs are actually and also the STs are at the lower rung. So that is why we need better amount of capacity development, and at the end of the day, we also need to focus on the private sector. In the US, you must have heard about the term known as diversity. In the US, every private company take this word very seriously. Why? Because the more diverse their workforces are or their employees are, they must be coming from various backgrounds, from the Indian community, from the Hispanic, from the various Mexican, from the black community. So the more diverse their workplaces are, the more they will be getting points when it comes to government procurement or various environmental social governance procurements or disclosures. So those companies will be treated positively by the government and they can also get better subsidies. We can also do this approach in the country, right? We can actually try to nudge the private sector, firstly by giving them more investments and so on, and also by adopting this diversity policy. Apart from government jobs, we can also try to get reservation via indirect and positive principles in the private sector too. So this was a very interesting debate, right? We got so many points, so many judgments. It is now time to write an answer. Okay, so write one in the comments below and let me know. Now I will be moving on to the next one. Guys, here the High Seas Treaty is in the news. Why? Because the government of India is thinking of enacting a law to implement an international treaty. Now, does it remind you all of some DPSP or Directive Principle of State Policy article? If you can remember, let me know in the comments. So this is one provision. We have to understand that whenever India is signing and ratifying an international treaty, we have to have a domestic national legislation. Consider the case of the environmental protection law, or the various environmental laws, or various other laws, even for example the case of Money Laundering Act. So we have some international treaty which India is actually part of, and then only we have to sign some agreements and we have to actually legislate a law on that same. So here we are actually thinking of having a treaty, a law, a national law on the high seas. Right? Now this is extremely important when we talk about the case of environment and legislation. Firstly, let us look at what our high seas are. So to understand that, we have to firstly understand what do you mean by UNCLOS. This is a United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. This is also known as the Constitution of Ocean. Why? Because this particular law is telling properly, right? It is trying to designate properly the various zones of various countries and their respective territorial control over those particular maritime boundaries. What I mean by that is that, this was actually thought of in the 1982 in Jamaica, right? And accordingly, we have demarcated the various seas all across the country. Now, based on this demarcation under the UNCLOS, we have territorial water, we have contiguous zone, we have exclusive economic zone, and finally the high seas. So up to 12 nautical miles. In the comments, can you let me know what is 1 nautical mile equivalent to? Now, up to 12 nautical miles, we have the sovereign territory or the territorial waters, right? It also covers the airspace and the seabed below the same. So if you want to do some sea mining here, you are actually allowed to do so. Now, also, when we extend beyond that, we have the contiguous zone, which is another, 12 nautical miles. Now, sovereign rights will be extended up to the 200 nautical miles, right? And here you can actually do anything that you want as a country above the water and also on the continental shelf that you have. Now, beyond this particular line, we have the high seas. This means that this is actually the international water and these are beyond any national jurisdiction. Correct? So the definition of a high seas stand like that. These are the areas of the ocean beyond national jurisdiction, 200 nautical miles, which is the boundary of the exclusive economic zone of any country. So what we mean by high seas is that when we talk about high seas, these are open for all countries. When we talk about navigation, overflight navigation, and also the navigation of various vessels, we can also do fishing. You can also lay various underlying cables or pipelines for internet, for fuel respectively. We can also undertake the seabed mining, which is a very emerging international zone right now. Correct? So this is actually a very, very comprehensive treaty, right? And also we have to understand this is having around 168 countries as of now, right? So this is what we mean by the high seas. We have actually one question from 2022 prelims, right, on the UNCLOS. So you can let me know the answer here in the comments below. Now moving beyond, we have the high seas treaty signed by the country recently. Now, this high seas treaty, or also known as ocean treaty, here we have to conserve the ocean 30% by 2030. This is the 30 into 30 target that we are having when it comes to the conservation of the high seas. As you can see here, these are actually the high seas, right, in this color as you can see. So that means that oceans, we have to understand, they cover more than 70% of our planet's surface, and we have to understand that high seas cover most of that kind of ocean. So this treaty will be ensuring that we are having some protected areas which are known as marine protected areas. Why? Because there are cases of overfishing, overpollution, oil spills in the high seas, and you have just seen that these high seas are beyond any national jurisdiction. Now, if, for example, any country X is trying to pollute the high seas via overfishing, via mining, via so many other activities, so can I make that particular country accountable? Right? So there must be proper legislation for that, a treaty for that, a legally binding treaty. So this will be looking at various marine protected areas. This will be just like the national parks that we have in the country, right? This will be the national parks of ocean, which will be restricting any kind of commercial activity, any kind of destructive activities. We also need to conduct various EIA, environmental impact assessment, which generally means that if you are undertaking some kind of deep sea mining in some section of the high sea, that can pollute the environment, that can pollute the waters, that can kill the fish, that can pose a life to the biodiversity of the region. That is why to undertake any kind of project, you need to get a clearance from any kind of authority. Here it will be from the maybe International Seabed Authority or from the UNCLOS or any other designated body. When we talk about India, maybe by this law, India will be coming up with its own national body to actually look into environmental clearances. Also, we need to conserve the maritime genetic resources, right? We have so much amount of diversity in the oceans, and we have genetic diversity. We have so many products also that we can engineer, such as cosmetics, biotechnology. So we have to ensure that if one country is trying to have the benefits of the same from the high seas, the other countries should be also be able to do the same, right? Also, we need capacity building, technological transfer, because you know the Western countries, they can steadily develop any kind of technology, but we need to spread that to the other countries too. Also, we need to take care of the global governance side, right? Because we have to listen to the various laws and the regulations and obey them when we talk about implementing this high seas treaty. And that is why India did a strategic move right now. It is actually coming up with a legislation on the particular high seas treaty. Correct? Now this high seas treaty firstly will be having an act of the parliament. It will be soon be presented in the parliament here. Now we are here looking at a possible structure of that particular act, what that act can actually look like. Firstly, this act will be clarifying the various definitions of high seas, marine genetic resources, marine protected areas. Okay, so that there should be no confusion within the country. In cases of any legal disputes, we can actually refer to them definitions. Also, environment impact assessment of oceans, of high seas also will be defined. Blue economy, benefit sharing, common governance, all of the terms should be defined properly because of various legal disputes, because here we are not only talking about legal disputes within the country. Maybe there can be some XYZ countries within the high seas near India and they can have some legal disputes. That is why we have to be aware of the definitions first, and we have to base the definitions on the United Nations established or UNCLOS definitions here. Now, India is also thinking about an institutional structure. That means we need to have a body. For example, we have the National Biodiversity Authority, which is under the Biodiversity Act. So for any Biodiversity Act, for any other act, we generally have a statutory body. So we also need to have a statutory body which is known as the National Authority for the High Seas, right? And they should be having the function of granting permission for India's project in the various high seas, right? So this can have various experts, the various ministers, right? The bureaucrats. So all of them will be looking at the detailed project that India is maybe undertaking some project in the high seas, right? Also, we can approve and monitor the various maritime environmental impact assessment. We can also coordinate with the United Nations bodies and other nations with reference to our own activities, because you know this region, right, in the Indian Ocean, this particular region is extremely rich in various kinds of rare earth metals, critical minerals and various other aspects. So that is why if India wants to undertake any kind of mining activities here, we need to take permissions not only from the government or this kind of authority, which is, you know, the statutory authority, but also from the United Nations bodies and various other nations too. We have to ask for the permission and their own consent too. Also, this body will be representing India at various international negotiations or dispute settlement with reference to this treaty. And maybe it is speculated that this can be placed under the Ministry of Earth Sciences, but it can also have coordination with the Ministry of External Affairs, Environment and also shipping. So we will be looking later into what should be the details here, but as of now this is what the structure is looking like. Also, there can be some key provisions elsewhere. For example, say to protect the maritime biodiversity, we also will be identifying in this act itself, the various maritime protected areas in the high seas near India, right? Also, India will be trying to consult with the other countries. Next, it will be trying to also have various restriction on Indian vessels with reference to various shipping activities such as deep sea trawling, which is like you are trying to scrape off the deep sea and all the fish resources that you have. That means you are completely exhausting that kind of area. So that is a very kind of destructive when it comes to maritime diversity. Also, pollution control rules with reference to plastic dumping and all of those things will be looked at specifically right now when we have recently the India Ports Act, right? Recently. We are also right now following the MARPOL principles, which is stating India's obligations with reference to plastic waste, dumping, oil spills and various other things. We also discussed this in the previous analyst sessions too. Next, we also need to conserve the maritime resources, and that is why this benefit sharing principle also should be there in the legislation. The EIA aspect, that if any Indian company or government project is there in the high seas with reference to cabling, deep sea mining, we need to get that particular maritime EIA approval. Now it will be looking at which kind of authority we will be seeking the approval from, but that will be for a later date. Also, apart from EIA, we also need a cumulative impact assessment. That is, if there is any project, what will be the future outcomes based on the pollution level, biodiversity loss levels. Next, also the seabed mining will be regulated, the mineral resources will be regulated, and specifically rules for India-based mining projects will be very strict. At the end of the day, the Indian vessels and their rights and responsibilities also will be highlighted again. So this is actually, we are trying to have a proper kind of deep blue economy. And India is always committed to any kind of international treaties and agreements. So that is why we are trying to have this legislation. We will be looking at what the draft rules and regulations will be looking like. But here, if you are looking at deep sea mining and if you are looking at electronic sector, they are both related right now, because deep seas are actually rich treasure troves of polymetallic nodules, of cobalt rich ferromagnetic crust. This means that these are actually very important minerals to actually drive the electronic sector, the semiconductor sector and all those important items. So this is where this brings me to the conclusion. Here we have another mains question. You can actually practice this in the comments, and now we'll be moving on to the simplified section. The center has approved the 1500 crore scheme for promoting recycling in the critical mineral sector. This is a very important government scheme which is looking at the industrial policies when we talk about the critical minerals mission. Now this critical mineral mission is actually very broad and ambitious mission, which is totally kind of having a proposal of 16,000 crores to boost the critical mineral landscape in the country. You know that how important critical minerals are. In the previous discussion only, we were talking about the deep sea mining. Now, we get so many minerals from the deep sea. We also have so many minerals in various other countries where these are actually which are the components which are used in most modern day electronic items. So this is actually a very, very important mineral for the future. And also we have to understand countries like China and various other countries have progressed far away, right? When we are right now promoting more and more domestic manufacture, we also have the PLI scheme, we also have the electric vehicle revolution which is coming in India. We cannot ignore the critical minerals. So that is why, to establish the supply chain, the country is having 7 mission components, right, which is aligning with our own Atmanirbhar Bharat. That means we are trying to become self-reliant in the same. So what we are trying to do? We are trying to increase our critical mineral domestic procurement and production. We are trying to collaborate with various abroad countries with reference to the critical mineral acquisition. We have also done the same with various African countries and Latin American nations. Also, we are trying to look into the recycling of critical minerals, trade and market and various other components. Also, when we talk about the partnerships that we are having with Australia with reference to lithium, cobalt, rare earth, right? With reference to lithium triangle region, which is consisting of Argentina, Bolivia and Chile. We are also having the cooperation, and we have on Khanij Videsh Limited, which is also trying to collaborate and undertake mining activities in these countries. We also have the same with Russia, where titanium and rare earths are being explored, and at the end of the day we are also part of the mineral security partnership as a kind of a partner to boost critical minerals mission. Recently also we have the parliament which cleared the landmark mines and minerals amendment bill. This was actually to boost critical mineral production in the country, bring in more private sector investment to actually boost the sector. Now, when we are talking about the latest mission, which is the 1500 crore scheme for promoting recycling, we have to understand one of the overall strategies under the National Critical Minerals Mission was actually the recycling part. Right? This year will be having an implementation period of 6 years. What we are trying to do, we are trying to target the various waste products such as e-waste, batteries, scrap or catalytic converters, where we can actually procure the critical minerals from. You know that nothing in the economy right now is wasted, right, or should be wasted, because for example, if I am using this pen right now, this pen has various critical minerals within it. Now when this pen will no more be working, so I can easily be recycling this and getting the same out of it. So that is why I, as a country, India, maybe I'm not having the biggest resources of critical minerals in my own country, but we have the various electronic items. These are actually resources in themselves, right? So let us procure that same. So that is why we are trying to recycle the same. Okay, so who will be benefiting from this? Large recyclers, which are very big companies whose only work is to recycle the products, the various small MSMEs, startups. 1/3 out of the money is actually for them, for the MSMEs and the startups. We are actually trying to boost this kind of production. So there were two kind of incentives, right? First will be the capital subsidy. For example, if I am a startup right now and I want to set up this critical mineral recycling plant, so 20% subsidy I will be getting on this plant and the various machines that I need to put in my factory. Next, once the factory is being set up, I need to operate it also. I need to do the operation side. So on the operation side, government will be giving me subsidy based on my sales. So I should be having increment in sales or increasing sales every year. And the base year has been taken for comparison 2025-26. That means if I'm comparing in 2030, I will be comparing in 2025 how much my sales was, right? Also, the incentive cap is there. For large entity, 50 crore has been fixed. For capital, right, for total, and 10 crore for operational. For small companies, we having 25 crore kind of total subsidy and 5 crore for operating subsidies. So this is all for this topic. Now we have one PYQ from 2012. It is upon the rare earth, and you can see with reference to this data, and by taking help of this diagram, you can let me know what is the answer to this. So on to the next one now. Guys, as a part of your internal security, we have a very important topic today on the theater commands in the country. We have separate commands with reference to the various armed forces, but when we look at various other countries such as China, UK, Russia, even the CENTCOM of US, you should remember the term here, right? We all have different kind of commands. So what do you mean by this theaterization? Theaters or theaterization actually means that whenever we are talking about external threats, I cannot say that the armed forces will be taking care of it only, or I cannot tell only the Air Force should be going and fighting all our enemies. We have to have a unified approach, right? So what is presently in the country as of now, we have several commands. This means that we are integrating the Army, Navy and Air Force and their resources under a single theater commanders for defined geographical regions. That means that all of the Army, Navy and the Air Forces in one region will be having a single commander. And that single commander will be having the power of having response to various external threats. So this means that apart from separately working in silos, we are trying to bring in an unified approach in cases of any external threat. So this means that India as of now is having 17 separate service commands. Okay, with reference to the Army, we are having 7 commands, right? With reference to Air Force, we are having 7, Navy 3, Tri-Service 2 commands. Now these Tri-Service commands are actually looking at the integration of Army forces, Naval forces and the Air Forces. Right? So as of now, if we are talking about unified theater, it is correct to say that as of now we have, but a very limited one. When we talk about this kind of tri-service command, we have the Andaman and Nicobar command and the Strategic Forces command, which is looking at the nuclear resources in the country. But we have some various issues with that. We cannot have a unified approach when we talk about the response to any external threat. And also, various other countries have that. That is why we are planning to have in the future a proper Western command. If you can see here, this is the proper Western command, an Eastern command, and a Southern theater command. We can also have various other additional commands too. But as of now, what the proposed models in the Ministry of Defense is actually looking like, we can actually have two models. Firstly, we can have a domain-based model or expertise-based model. Expertise means that air defense, maritime, land theater, and Eastern land theater command. Right? This Western land theater will be for Pakistan, Eastern will be for China. Right? But here the Indian Air Forces is having some issues. The Indian Air Forces are telling that if you are having this kind of command, correct? Here we do not have any Air Force command, right? That means here we will be dividing the Air Force and the resources between all of these four commands, right? And their own flexibility will be reduced. And the armed forces between themselves always have some conflicts between them, right? All of the armed forces would want their forces to be more superior and more prestigious. So this is one of the issues. Now, when we look at the second model, we also have an advisory-based integrated theater commands, which is the new plan right now. The initial plan was a domain-based one. Rather, the new one is looking at the Western Theater Command, the North or Eastern Command, the Maritime Theater Command, and a possible Air Defense Command for functional command. Now, this is actually more logical, but the debate is still continuing on the Air Force because they have to be actually dividing their own strategic assets. Okay. Now, when we talk about why India is doing this at all, because earlier we have had 17 commands, but as of now we are trying to integrate everything. It makes sense because the modern warfare is actually multi-domain. Also in the Pahalgam attack that you have seen, right? A particular threat came out of nowhere and we also responded via the Operation Sindoor. Also, if you look at the Operation Sindoor, we use so many apparatus, so many mechanisms, so many integration, mainly the Air Force, the drones and all of those things, right? That is why the cyber attacks, the satellite jamming or the drone swarms and everything that we have seen as of now, they need a multifaceted approach. Also, when we talk about the resources that we have to pool all the resources together. Correct. And also, when we talk about the faster decision making, because every command here, for example, every command here will be having one single commander. Every commander will be reporting to the Ministry of Defense and also the Chief of Defense Staff, right? So the Chief of Defense Staff and these military commanders, right, all of this, they will be looking at an unified approach. This can lead to faster decision making because these modern threats cannot wait. Okay. Also, we have to follow the global best practices of the UK, US, China, and these are all looking at these integrated armed forces too. Now the main challenge here, it's actually coming from the air forces because they are thinking that their assets will be divided, right? Also, they are thinking that will they be extended only to be a support arm for the Indian Army and the Navy forces because they are having their own status, they are having their own significance. Also, they are also arguing that we should not blindly copy the US model, right? Also, there are other questions that who will be the theater commanders, what would be the eligibility from the army, from the navy or from the air forces they should be coming from. So these are all the questions. Also, the question is on how the budget will be divided. Also, they are asking that as of now we have followed this particular system for 70 years. Now suddenly if you are trying to bring this total new system overhaul, there can be issues. And these issues can directly impact our national security. Also, the human resources and the skilling, their upgradation, the education, all of these things will be a huge thing in the short term. So the way forward is that we should be having a clarity on our doctrine. What should be our response? What should be a philosophy of military approach? Okay, firstly we have to try to have that approach. Next, when we are trying to implement this, let us implement this in a phased approach, phased implementation, not a straightforward. Also, we also need to focus on the cyber and the space domains apart from these four domains, right? Because cyber domain is extremely increasing right now. Also, the space is increasingly becoming a warfare or war ground. And at the end of the day, we have to have this trust building. See, in all these things, the army is having their own viewpoint, the navy and the air forces, they have their own complaints. Let us sort all these complaints, let us build trust in them, right? That is when we can have a proper unified defense structure. So that is all for this particular article. We'll be moving on to the next one now. Guys, this article is a very interesting one where we are trying to see how the government is trying to link the anganwadis to our schools. Now, these are very important articles when we talk about the welfare schemes for the population, because the anganwadis are actually catering to the nutritional and the early learning needs of the children which are aged between 0 to 6 years. And between 0 to 6 years, not only the children, but also their mothers are actually taken care with reference to various nutritional aspects, educational aspects, right? Because it is generally believed, and according to various scientific experts, studies, it has been held that when we talk about the development of a child over a period of time, the role of their mothers is also very important. We have to keep their mothers nutritionally well, educated, so that they make proper decisions for their children. So right now the government is actually looking at this particular opportunity of linking the anganwadis with the schools. So this is actually known as the co-location measure that the government is doing. This is the first key term that you need to understand. Now when we talk about the anganwadis, this was actually conceptualized under the ICDS Integrated Child Development Scheme in 1975, right? So this was when the government thought that we can take the children and their mothers together. So as of now, we have around 8 lakh beneficiaries, and here we have a lack of social security for the various underprivileged sections, which is why we are sending their child, we are sending their mothers to these anganwadis to get skilled, to get educated, to get proper vaccines, nutrition, health, and at the end of the day, this is also the very first point of contact for early child care development. Okay, so this is where early childcare development and education is facilitated. Now this particular mission that we are trying to have here is actually with the collaboration with the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Women and Child Development, where they are actually trying to set up these two aspects, such as Bal Vatika, which is actually under the National Education Policy, where we have just seen that anganwadis are targeted at children aged between 0 to 6 years. Now the government is thinking that when the child will be reaching 5 years of age, they are right now ready to go on to class 1. So when they are going to class 1, we have to ensure that the transfer of the child from anganwadi to a school must be very properly facilitated. Otherwise, the children will be actually be very amused, or sometimes they would not want to go to schools. That is why let us have this linkage. Also, the government is looking at designing an Aadhaar Shila, which is a national curriculum for these children which are actually under the program of early child care education, which is under the Ministry of Education. So the main key feature of this guideline is that before we do not have this kind of synergy between anganwadis and the school. That is why we are right now having the same. Firstly, this physical co-location and mapping will be done with reference to various schools and anganwadis. So this will be a kind of a long process. The government has to do this kind of thing. So firstly, the government also has identified two problems. Firstly, we have two different databases to track the children and anganwadis. Firstly, we have the Poshan Tracker under the Ministry of Women, right, and Child Development. We also have the UDISE Plus, which is under the Ministry of Education, which is looking at tracking students at schools. So let us combine this and let us give the students a lifelong ID based on their Aadhaar card and the various birth rates and the birth registration details under the CRS system, right? So this will be actually be looking at all of the records at a unified level. Correct. So this is given a name of the APAR ID, which will be given to school students from class 1 onwards, and here they can have easy tracking of the students. At the end of the day, the joint activities at schools will be motivating the students. Also, the teacher training program will be upskilling the teachers at the end of the day to make this program a very unique one. So that is where this topic is concluding. We'll be now moving on to the next one. Guys, now we are looking at another GS3 topic when it pertains to your inclusive growth and development. Why? Because this is a particular topic which is talking about the informal manufacturing sector. And this informal manufacturing sector is actually the place where a lot of unorganized sector of our population is working. So let us look at some of the data. Now, according to this article, this is actually a very big Indian economic puzzle. Why? Because understand this fact very simple. Our GDP is growing over a period of time in the recent quarters of our cycle. As you can see, GDP is on the rise. Okay. On the other hand, can you see one thing, that the manufacturing sector is increasing and GDP is increasing. But informal data, the informal section of the population who are unregulated, who are not having a proper big scale of operation, which are small karkhanas or small industries, right? These workers here do not have proper health insurance or EPF registration, so social security is not there. Okay, but one thing you have to realize is that this unorganized sector only, right, they actually contribute significantly to employment but very less to GDP, right? So here what is happening is that while our Indian GDP is increasing, but this employment in this particular informal sector are decreasing. Now these informal enterprises are actually those enterprises which are unincorporated or not registered under the Companies Act or the Companies Act 2013, right? And the recent study, which is actually the very first study of the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, named as Quarterly Bulletin of Unincorporated Sector, showed that the number of enterprises in the informal manufacturing sector reduced by 4.7%, but our GDP has increased. So this is a kind of a two-stage issue that we have. And also when we talk about the informal sector and the contribution of them to our GDP, we see that this actually is resulting in a very kind of a huge kind of contribution. As of financial year 2023, we are having around 23.7% of contribution of informal GVA in our total GVA, or simply GDP, right? That means around 24% of our GDP is accountable for only this kind of sector. Now when we look into the deeper details here, the big picture that we see is that the total enterprises have actually increased from the past quarter, but the total employment has actually decreased from the previous quarter. The main issue here is with the informal manufacturing sector, because the number of enterprises in the manufacturing sector has gone down from the previous quarter, right? Also the workers to employment, right, they have also gone down. And with reference to various other sectors such as trade sector, the small shops and so on, they have gone up marginally, and the other services as repair services, mobile services and all those things, they have also increased. But the main issue is this informal manufacturing sector, right? So this has decreased, and this is a concern. Why? Because the number of enterprises are decreasing, employment is decreasing. So does this mean that we are having a jobless growth? That GDP of the country is increasing. So where is this increase going to? To the richer sections of the population, to the formal sections of our population. If it is the case, then what will the informal sectors do? Also, are we seeing a K-shaped recovery after the COVID crisis? Because we have to understand that during the COVID pandemic, the GDP of the economy fell down all of a sudden. Then some sectors increased over a period of time. But maybe this increase was only for the formal sector. There were various informal sector which revived but again declined. So these are the informal sector. So if you are looking at this image, this is actually a K-shaped one, right? This is actually a K-shaped recovery, that the formal sectors they recover, but the informal sector they recover and they slump again. Also, there are various experts who tell that the report is clearly out that the employment in the informal sector has gone down, but there are various people and the experts, they are telling that GDP data also may be overstated by around 1.5%. Okay, so these are the various allegations. And also the consensus is that if these people are not getting this kind of jobs and employment in the informal sector, then they are actually vulnerable to the economic affairs, right? Because the informal story here is that they are having 9.3% job loss. So this is the biggest puzzle that we are seeing despite economic rise. So this is the thing that you have to keep in mind when we talk about the recent data and the recent state of economy, because in many economic answers related or unrelated to this, And even in the informal sector, even in the inclusive growth section, you can actually take this kind of section and examples. Now on to the last one. In the Hindu today, in the editorial page, we have one data point here which is looking at the main issue of one of the welfare scheme for the disabled sections of the population, and mainly we are looking at the performance of that particular scheme. So that is why you should be relating the syllabus very properly. So this is the unique disability ID project, where if you can look at this, the year of birth, percentage of disability, the issue, and also the name of the person, the photo of the person will be given by the Department of Empowerment of Persons with Disability under the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. So this ID card is actually mandatory for all the states and UTs for this accordance of this particular ID card to the people with disabilities, because this will be covering all eligible individuals who are disabled, to identify them, to give targeted beneficiaries, right? This is a centralized portal where all disabilities under the Disabilities Act of 2016 are covered, right? Here, with difference between government schemes, pensions, scholarships, travel concessions, everything is actually a part of this kind of card, right? And also, if you want to track some disabled person, if you want to help them, if you want to give them mental and financial support, this ID card is actually the go-to case for the government of India and also the government of states. But there are some issues, as you can see in this map here. Firstly, we have delayed processing. That means with reference to any scholarship, pensions, and despite having the cards, the people are not getting proper benefits. Also, only 60% of India can use, as you can see here, basic smartphones and the basic programs that such as copy paste and so on. So we can actually understand that disabled sections of the population will be not able to undertake those operations also sometimes. Also, the funding cuts are also seen, as you can see here. It has been drastically cut in the last year. Then, and we have to also look at the various state performance, right? For example, so the vote states such as Himachal Pradesh, right, Ladakh, the Union Territory, and also Mizoram, they are facing intense amount of issues with reference to this program, correct? So that means that the performance of this particular scheme is not well. So that is why the government also should be kind of focusing on, such as the best performing states of Meghalaya, Tamil Nadu, Odisha, Karnataka. We have to follow these model. So implement this model on a better level. So this was all for today. I thank you all for being a very patient audience. Please do attempt the quiz which is following up. Until we meet again, all the best and best of luck. Thank you.